That is generally sometimes scary.
That's a good pro tip, I'll remember that next time.
What?
If it's a vague agenda, that's not a reason to not show up, it's actually a reason to go.
So you're technically listed as calling in, right? You're the presenter.
I suppose so. Yeah, because I understand.
You know that awful pop song, My Heart Is in a Bad Feeling?
I know that.
Oh, God,
I
when did you
selected
say that?
phone call. Selected phone call, so.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
Let me just pass that around the room.
I guess I could try the other number. There's two numbers listed. I don't understand why it's not.
Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Why?
There are snacks, if anyone's hungry, drinks, if anyone's thirsty.
Did you run here?
No, my rum is not here.
Exactly.
That kind of drink.
My Cuban rum.
And they probably frown on us smoking cigars.
Yeah.
Probably set off some alarms.
Calling this
Then
other
someone
number.
will
You know,
agree.
maybe that's more. Normally it makes like a sound like you're
But
connecting.
it doesn't actually seem to register that. Do it again.
It's weird, isn't it?
Is there like an FU code?
What if you turn the phone on and off? Reboot it.
Seems like the problem's on there.
Okay, so I mean,
It says talking.
it says talking now, it wasn't doing that before.
I guess.
What I'm gonna do is try to call in and see if I can hear you guys. Yeah.
That's down. Continue chattering.
Yeah, please make some.
Who wants to sing it, Havana? Yeah, just go ahead and belt it out there. We'll do the rhythm.
Well, I'll tell you, the music.
Pretty phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
That's really cool.
I mean, youngsters, oldsters, didn't matter, they were really talented. And it's really interesting because they were telling us the history of Cuban music is kind of classical Spanish operas and, versus then the African tones that came in. Because, I don't know, Cuban people must be really resilient because I lost track kind of how many rebellions we were talking about. It finally got to the point of which rebellion are we talking about, But supposedly, when the Spaniards settled Cuba, they didn't want to build anything because that was beneath them. So that's when they imported the slaves to come and build their infrastructure for them. But then,
Good to go.
all right.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Public Records Advisory Council meeting. I'm going to let Mary Beth go ahead and do a brief introduction before passing the torch.
Yes, so now I am officially no longer the chair of the Public Records Advisory Council, And I am passing the torch over to Ginger McCall, who comes to us from Washington DC via a number of other outlets. As you all know, Ginger was one of the 3 names we submitted to the governor, and was selected and appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. So welcome, Ginger. She's been here just about a month.
Yeah.
And she hit the ground running, so we've already been to a number of different places and meetings, and she's held 1 meet and greet. She's got another one, I think, tomorrow night. So, Ginger?
All right, thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to be here and to be taking on this new role. I'm thrilled to be in Oregon. I've been here for about a month now. I started on the 25th of April. In case you don't recall, I had previously been at the U.S. Department of Labor in Washington, D.C., where I was defending Freedom of Information Act lawsuits and doing information and privacy law, as well as processing third-party subpoenas. But I started off my career as a public records requester, where I was making requests usually on surveillance-related topics to agencies like the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice, and then I was litigating against the federal government. So I've seen both sides of public records requests, and it's been very interesting. But I'm very excited to take this new role on. So my first order of business is to hire a deputy. And that announcement was actually posted today. A copy of it, I distributed a copy of it to you as well. Let me see if I can pull up. Oh.
May I ask that we just do a quick round of introductions?
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. I meant to do that. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll just go around the table, starting with Mary Beth.
I'm Mary Beth Kirk, State Archivist.
Rob Lizette, Legal Counsel, Association of Oregon Counties.
Michael Crone from the Attorney General's Office.
Sharon Kostravi, Staff Attorney for SEIU Local 503.
Mark Landauer here on behalf of the Special Districts Association of Oregon.
I'm Liz Craig, I'm with the Department of Administrative Services.
I'm Steve Sewell, I'm the watchdog editor for the Oregonian.
Les Sides, Now Here Enterprise.
Tony Hernandez, I'm a member of the public.
Great. And then Stephanie Clark, who is.
And apologies, I was just so excited to get started, and we'll go ahead and hear from people.
Peter Geller, Matt Friesen with Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association.
Martin Garvis with Oregon Housing and Community Services.
Sue Ryan, City of Newburgh, and I also sit on the Records Management Committee for the Oregon Association of Municipal Courts.
And Michael, Oregon Legislative Council.
Great, thank you all. So, my first order of business was to hire a deputy. For some reason, my screens aren't mirroring, and all I'm seeing is the first of my slideshow. So I did post a job announcement up on the website, which I have distributed to you as well. Let's see it. I think it's the go-to meeting that's giving me trouble here. So we're just going to stick with the PowerPoint. But I did distribute the job announcement to you. That was posted today up on the website. And it was also sent out via our email list. We're going to send it out via social media, and we're distributing it, of course, to you. And I'm going to be distributing it at the meeting briefs that I have upcoming. What would be most helpful for me is if you could take a look at that job announcement, and if there's anyone that you know who would be well qualified for that job, I would love it if you could go ahead and refer them to me. I have it open until, I believe, June 23rd. All right. I think I'm going to have to exit out of the place because this is just not working. I apologize.
Stephanie, do you have to get it out of here, since it looks like it's mirroring?
Yeah, for some reason it's not mirroring my laptop. I do apologize. All right, there we go. Okay, now I have it up. All right, so one of the second things, and as I'm going through this, it matches with my draft strategic plan, which I posted up on the website, and I've also distributed to you. For folks who are following along at home, these documents are up on the website for the Public Records Advisory Council, with the exception of the job announcement, which is on the Secretary of State's website, and will soon be on the website for the Public Records Advocate and Public Records Advisory Council. So the second item on my agenda was to do outreach to other ombuds offices. I thought that it would be wise to not try to reinvent the wheel. I know Mary Beth has done a lot of research on other ombuds offices around the country that are doing similar things to what we want to do here. So I've started a process of outreach to those offices, talking to them about the experiences that they've had, what they've learned, the sorts of mechanisms that they have for intake, for processing complaints, for mediating disputes. I spoke first with the woman who started the Office of Government Information Services, which is the federal corollary to my office, OGIS. And she gave me some very good advice about getting mediation training, about how to do case intake, how to sort of balance the interests between requesters and government, what sorts of people to look for when I'm hiring, what kind of background. So I'm continuing this process. So far, I've spoken with folks in Arizona, Massachusetts, and the District of Columbia. I have 4 or 5 more states that are on the list as well. I'm also beginning a process of soliciting feedback from relevant stakeholders. I have a series of meet and greets scheduled, including one that I've completed, and another tomorrow. I try to schedule those at varying times throughout the week to accommodate different people's schedules. For folks working in government, something during the day might be best, so I scheduled several of the meet and greets during the day. For folks who are members of the public, they might have a 9-to-5 job, perhaps something in the evening or even on a weekend would be better for them. So I did schedule one Saturday meet and greet and several late afternoon and evening meet and greets. I'm also going to be touring with Stephanie in conjunction with the records management training, and I'm going to be doing some meet and greets around the state with her as well as some trainings. Of course, I'm meeting with you, and I'm very interested in hearing your feedback after this presentation. I'm going to be embarking on a campaign of social media outreach. I have a person here within the Secretary of State's office who's going to be assisting me with the social media outreach. I will have a Twitter presence, Facebook, and also hopefully a blog. I'm modeling that in part on the work of the Office of Government Information Services, which I think has a really excellent outreach program to the public. I think one of the most important parts of my office, and something that will make or break the office's success, is whether or not members of the public and also agencies actually know that this office exists, and what services the office provides. So I think the outreach piece is very important. So I'm also going to be doing meetings with the public and the media. I have a meeting scheduled with some folks from the Oregonian and also some attorneys up in Portland. I'm going to be reaching out to media in other cities around the state, so I can have conversations with them about what they think would be useful to see from my office, and also so that I can inform them about the services that I'll be offering. And I had a lot of meetings with individual government officials. I've met with folks from DOJ, I've met with the Attorney General, people from the Governor's Office, various agencies, city officials, and also district attorneys.
Ginger, may I ask a question? Could you go back one slide, please? When you say meeting with government officials, I note that there are 3 distinct groups of governmental entities that are missing there, that are not subject to the mediation that is required under the bill that was enacted. That would include special districts, school districts, as well as counties. However, your office also has a distinct role as contemplated under the bill to provide education. And I think that you would probably want to include those 3 types of governmental bodies for your outreach purposes, purely from the educational perspective, at least for the time being.
Great, that's a great idea.
And that's part of the reason why we've coordinated her initial trainings with Stephanie, because that's usually who we're meeting with, is local government. And so that they'll be able to piggyback off of that.
Right, and I recognize that you have a mediation role with the cities and they wanted that, but some of us chose to not participate.
Observe for a while.
Watch and see how this ship sails before we voluntarily jump on board. But I wrote that one of the big reasons, at least my organization was interested in this, was purely from the educational opportunity that it would provide. So I just would request that you make that now.
Yeah, I think that would be very useful, and I'd be happy to do that. I'll talk with Stephanie. I know we have some things already scheduled But I'd love to connect with you after this meeting, and if you could connect me with those government.
We'll connect another time. I've been invited to testify before committee this afternoon, which would be my other request, and I apologize because I will have to leave a little early. And that would be, I noticed on the agenda that you'll be planning meetings in the future, and if we could avoid legislative meetings, that would be really helpful, at least to a couple of us who have to be in the building.
Certainly. Yeah, I apologize.
Don't worry about it. You've been here a month. If it was 31 days, I might have told you.
So, but yeah, I should connect with you via email, and if you have suggestions for particular, special district, school district accounts.
Well, and I'm really special. I've asked that my email also be changed so that we can communicate, because my state email expired, so.
And that's been fixed.
So on the subject of training, this is what I have planned so far. The statute mandates that I provide training to government entities, but I think a useful piece of this is also to provide training to the public. I think if members of the public and the press and other frequent requesters have a better sense of how to make a good request, how to research that request, where to direct it, that would probably create better outcomes on the request processing side. So I am including a public training, and because I happen to have expertise on the Freedom of Information Act, I'll probably throw that in as a bonus as well. And I do have a series of government trainings that are already scheduled, and we will also be scheduling some other trainings around the state throughout the summer. And again, like you said, I think it would be excellent to do some outreach, both on the initial level for meet and greets, but also to do trainings with special districts, school districts, and counties. So you can see we have a pretty busy agenda. I thought in the interest of conserving resources, it would be great to travel with the records management folks. It'll save my office and their office a little bit of money since we'll be combining transportation. And it's also a great way for me to meet folks who are interested already in records issues. So, establishing a mediation process is the next step. I did draft up some administrative rules, which I hope we can talk about a little bit later in the meeting. It seems to me, after looking at the statute, that the process for administrative rules is that I'm not necessarily individually empowered, or my office is not empowered to do administrative rules. The rules should be approved by the Records Advisory Council. So I have sent those along to you in advance. I also have them posted up on the website for those who are following along at home. And I have distributed a copy of them to you here. It'd be great if we could do at least a little initial discussion about the administrative rules today. Getting those administrative rules in place is pretty key to my being able to fulfill the mediation requirements of the statute. I'm a little bit uncomfortable doing mediation without any sort of formal rules in place. The rules exist to both bind my office, but also to inform the public and to inform government entities about their rights and obligations within that process. And I will be doing this with an opportunity for public comment. It will be a formal rulemaking. Establishing a website and social media presence is something that I have been working on. Let's see if this will bring up the website. For me, but unfortunately it will not for you. I will send the website out afterwards. I've been working with our tech folks to revamp the website and to actually make it something that's very user-friendly. It has a series of buttons that are very easy to use. A button that tells some background on me, a button that allows folks to file a complaint online, and the complaint form is a fairly simplified form. I based it off of some other Ombuds Office complaint forms. It also has a link to the Public Records Advisory Council and to some other resources. Now, I think the resources section of the website is going to be one of the most important sections of the website for the purposes of the office serving its statutory function. I envision it being a central place where people who are interested in making a public records request can read about the public records statute, can read about the exemptions from the record for the universal fee schedule that was proposed by DAC. It's a place where there will be a central information hub on public records requests. And eventually what I'd like to do, and I'm in the process of doing this right now, but I've been a bit stymied by the lack of information online, is make that a place where there's a list of contacts for agency public records requests. So if you want to make a public records request for this particular agency, this is a place that you could look to find the contact information and hopefully a website with instructions on how to make a request to that agency. I'm also working on establishing social media accounts and a blog for public outreach. The next piece is policy recommendations. This is something that the statute says the council shall make recommendations on changes in law, policy, and practice that could enhance transparency in public process and government and facilitate rapid dissemination of public records to requesters. So this isn't necessarily something that I'm individually empowered to do. Again, I'll be looking to the council for feedback on what you think would be useful as far as proposals for reform. June 1st is the deadline for potential legislative proposals, legislative concepts, as they call them. So we're going to put a placeholder in there for proposals by the Public Records Advisory Council. I would love to hear your ideas on those. I think we have scheduled a little bit of time later on in the agenda for it. Also, helpfully, there was an executive order that was signed on April 30th that encouraged the council to move forward on a statewide standardized key structure, to work with the state archivist to update records management systems and technologies for state agency records, and to develop a mechanism to track requests, responses, and performance metrics, and using that information to identify frequently requested records, which can then be proactively disclosed. So that executive order, which is available online on the governor's website, is Executive Order 18-5, does give a lot of, it does buttress the council's power to make proposed reforms. So I'm seeking feedback, both in this meeting and in my meet and greet, on what I think would be useful, what would be useful for my office to engage in, what are the best ways forward, what resources should I include on the website and in my training, how can I better reach the necessary constituents, and what changes should potentially be made to public records law or its implementation. So these, I hope, are some areas that the council will be able to focus on in the coming months. And again, my contact information, which is up on the website as well. So, let's see how we're doing on time. Oh, great, we were right about on time despite technical difficulties. So I'm very interested in hearing your feedback on what I've done so far, what I should do moving forward, and especially the feedback questions.
So, hearing about your goals to reach out to the public and training members of the public, I'm sure you have other entities, groups in mind, but just for the record, I'm hoping you can reach out to not only big media companies like the Oregonian, but to, from an equity lens, like the smaller newspapers and smaller media outlets, student journalists, universities as well, since that training will probably be very appreciated as people get out into the working world. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Also, I would love to do outreach to advocacy groups, to nonprofit organizations, to groups that are doing public interest work. Because I think that public records, just from my background, working at a group that was doing public interest work, public records are really key to that. So if you have ideas about particular entities that I should reach out to, I would love to hear that.
Sure.
Email me or let me know after the meeting.
Sorry, I was late, conflicts, but I'm going over the strategic plan. It seems to me that there should be some reference, maybe even in the preamble or something, to reference to the audit. I know it seems like an eternity ago for some of us, but
the DAS audit, you mean?
yeah, the audit that was committed, that was done after
Yeah.
the record audit was done after the
Secretary of State.
the Secretary of State's office audit that was done after during the start of the 15th session, and precipitated the event that led to the creation of this council.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Is there anything in particular in the audit that you think I should highlight?
I mean, I think it would be good, because there were the shortcomings in the audit I think that there should be some reference in the strategic plan that says how this is how those items that were found in the audit to be, where we needed improvement, are going to be fixed or addressed in the commission's strategic plan.
the ambition to make sure the public learns that this office exists, as well as special districts and cities. And that's going to be one of the most significant values that you can achieve in the first year, and you just have, they know they have someplace to go.
Do you have a sense of how I can raise public awareness of the office? Any ideas or suggestions for that, beyond what I've mentioned?
Get blocked on the president's Twitter account, maybe?
Yeah, what?
Get blocked on the president's Twitter account?
It's hard, as I'm not personally very active.
Yeah.
I think the social media strategy is a good modern way to do it. You know, trying to reach out to advocacy organizations like SBJ or IRE or the Online News Association to maybe do a Twitter partnership or something, at least from the requester side. Do the same with agencies that have active social media. That's good with their social media accounts.
There might be some old media ways of getting out there too, that you might want to think about. I have on my dueling committee, I have the Association of Broadcasters represented, and radio and TV appearances might be something that someone would be interested in. I could imagine Think Out Loud on OPB being interested in talking to you, for example.
Yeah, I can do some outreach to them. I'm scheduled to do a small radio program on Friday. I spoke to the Oregonian and the Statesman Journal, but I think more outreach in that area would be great.
On your list, you showed a public presentation at Crooked River Ranch.
Yes.
So what is that?
So interestingly, on my very first day at this job, some gentlemen showed up very randomly. They were from Crooked River Ranch. They've been doing a lot of public records work in relation to the special districts there and the homeowners association. And they were very interested in, I feel the skepticism over there. They were very interested in the public records aspect of my office. They had asked specifically that I come out and do a training on public records there. So it seemed like a good invitation. So we'll be stopping by there to do a training on both the Oregon State Public Records Law, but also the Federal Freedom of Information Act.
Are the government trainings that you had listed, are those open to anybody in state government, or who is the target audience for those?
I'm going to defer this one to Stephanie because she's organizing a lot of those
So
trainings.
do you mean trainings or meet and greets?
It was right under the public one at Crooked River Ranch. You had all those listed out.
Yeah.
So those are standing all-staff meetings that I've had set up for individual agencies, and I'm bringing her along with me.
Got it, okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure.
So we're tying in, public records basics, intro to public records law, and then she talks about kind of the access side.
Okay.
I do think it would be a great idea to do a training that's just open to anyone in government who's interested in showing up, to publish on that and maybe just host it here.
Okay.
After I finish with the meet and greet, I think that'll be the sort of next stage of development, for the office.
So doesn't DOJ still do some sort of annual training?
We typically have public records training as part of our big public law conference, and occasionally we'll do one or more additional trainings throughout the year. That's generally open to all state government, but limited to that.
Is that a fee? I mean, I think that's a place where potentially it could be helpful. I mean, I can make free trainings available. Some agencies might find that helpful if they don't want to take a fee or they're having a hard time getting approval from their supervisor.
I'm not mad.
We should be busy.
Very busy. Hopefully, once I get my deputy, I will be personally slightly less busy. So I'm hoping to make that a fairly fast hiring process. The deadline for applications is the end of June, and then I'm hoping to have the decision made in probably 3 weeks. So I did a fair amount of hiring when I was working at the Electronic Privacy Information Center. So I'm familiar
On the deputy, I know that, we did have a number of applicants for your job, who were, relatively recent law school graduates. I know experience is listed as a quality as desired, but there were some strong people out there. I don't know whether maybe it's worth, looking back into some of those resumes.
That's true. I don't know if I could do individual outreach to them or.
Yeah, it's been within 6 months, I think, or, might probably be pushing the edge. We'll just need to check with HR to see if they still have all that. I know I do, but we could just check with them and make sure that we can still do it under HR laws, so.
And
I don't know HR.
And, this is actually an issue where I need a little bit of your feedback. The way that I had drafted the announcement and it originally envisioned it, I had envisioned it for an attorney, but I did have someone call me today and say, you know, they listed off their experience, they're not an attorney, but they have experience with mediation and X, Y, and Z, other relevant things. So now I'm just sort of considering whether or not I should go back and maybe edit the announcement to make it not limited just to attorneys. I mean, I think an attorney would probably be preferred for this position, but I don't know that it would necessarily, you know, in the universe of potential good fits for this position, I'm not sure that all of the best fits would necessarily be an attorney.
Can you talk a little bit more about the division of labor between you and the deputy?
That is something that I'll have to develop over time. I can't say that I have a firm plan for it at the moment. Right now, I've just been sort of focusing on getting things off the ground. But I think it will be particularly useful to have a deputy. I'm going to be doing a fair amount of traveling around the state to do training, so to have someone who can manage things at the office, you know, take intake complaints, deal with mediation while I'm away. I imagine that they will be probably doing a lot of the same duties that I do. You know, working with requesters and agency folks who file a complaint, who want mediation, or who just have a question. I think that the reason I had originally envisioned this being for an attorney is because I anticipate that a lot of the phone calls I'm going to receive aren't going to be requests for formal facilitated dispute resolution. They're going to be just a question that someone has about a records request. A requester who maybe their request was denied by a government entity or there was some information withheld and they want to know whether or not that's a proper withholding. Or an agency that has a request and they potentially want to withhold a piece of information, can they properly withhold that? Which is why I thought perhaps an attorney would be best for that role. Because I need someone who can probably do most of the same things that I'm doing.
So something else to consider, I worked in Arkansas, and they've got I went to newspapers. One of the most useful tools they had was open records, open meetings, guidebook essentially. That was really easy to understand. It took out all the legalese from it. It grouped everything together, and I'm sure you've got a lot of it in mind, but something at some point, actually printed out a copy of it, or a page of it, just for you to look at, but that's another thing to consider.
If you have a link to it or a printed copy, I'd love to see it.
One other thought, I'm kind of focused on the outreach because it seems like a pretty essential task. So, and you mentioned the blog, it seems to me, I won't speak for any other organization, but the State Publishers Association, SPJ, if you wrote something focused at them to introduce yourself in the office that the organizations could get out. Frank, I can see the cities in this county special district folks doing the same thing, to just use their list to get out directly to people.
Well, and just to riff off that, Les, why not send that to all the papers as well in the form of a letter to the editor? That to me is a pretty simplistic way to spread some ink and fill some space. I would assume that your colleagues would probably be very interested in putting that on their newsletter.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I had done a little bit of outreach. I did do a letter to the editor. There were three 3 newspapers that did editorials on my position when I got appointed, so I reached out to those 3, and one of them did run my letter to the editor. I think it was the Bend Bulletin, but I think it's a good idea to renew that effort. Maybe now that I'm actually in the position, I would be able to get a little more traction there.
Well, Bill, on the travel schedule, I mean, if you're gonna go to Crooked River, it seems to me that the media organizations in Central Oregon could maybe come together for a meet and greet, you know, Bend, Redmond, Prineville, some of those folks, it's fairly compact.
Yeah, we're planning, that's something that we have planned.
So we have a venue in the city of Bend and city of Redmond ready. We just need to get the details sorted out.
Yeah.
They're booked.
You forgot the nugget. You forgot the nugget.
I did, didn't I?
That would be in Sisters.
We could all meet at the gallery restaurant.
Exactly.
From the back, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll learn all these places.
All right. Last call for feedback. And I do actually, I know we have a specific section for public comment, but I want to say if anyone who is here is not sitting around the table has any comments on any of these questions, I would be happy to hear your feedback.
I just want to make one comment. You talked about not hiring a deputy that's a registered attorney. Senate 106 required the public record advocate be an attorney, so they couldn't actually fill in for you in the event that you left or something that you didn't hire an attorney. That would be one drawback to not hiring an attorney for that position.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful feedback.
I just wanted to say, I think it's terrific that you've created this document in such short order, and I think it's a really good guideline for moving forward, and I think you can find success in a really tangible way, and I think it's a great start.
Well, thank you.
So our work here is done.
So that brings me to the next point. I know that per the statute, there's a requirement that this council meets, I believe it's once every 6 months. I think it would be great, at least for getting this office off the ground, if we could meet more regularly. So that's one option. Another option is to form smaller subcommittees that would potentially meet more regularly. So I would like to hear what you think about that. I think it would be great to have at least quarterly meetings as we get this off the ground, because your feedback is going to be pretty essential to me in that process. Especially with the administrative roles and the legislative concepts. Those are things that we have sort of a short timeline on, so it would be helpful to have some meetings front-loaded.
I don't have any quibble meeting, provided we have an agenda and things to do. I'm not a big fan of meeting just for meeting's sakes, and I know Les would appreciate not having to fly in from a different time zone.
My mule over.
But I'm more than happy to meet so long as there's work to be done. And again, just keeping in mind that we're trying to avoid certain days when our august legislative assembly is in doing work.
And I agree with that. I think the need on a drive when we meet, not just artificially schedule dates just because it looks good on a calendar.
Maybe it would be helpful to talk about just the next 2 quarters, what business is ahead, and then.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And I do promise you, I am a person who does not like meetings. So we will never have extraneous meetings. And our meetings will never run longer than they need to run. I think meetings should always be run by someone who doesn't enjoy meetings. Then the meetings stay short and efficient. So I promise you that at least. So let's
be a law. That's our next bill.
Yeah.
I get
So
behind that.
as far as what we're hoping to accomplish in the next 2 quarters, I think the administrative roles and the legislative concepts are, to me, the 2 biggest things, but also assistance with outreach would be great. Suggestions and feedback on outreach.
I think the other thing you need to look at too is the budget piece, which may be driven by your concepts and rules and your travel schedule. So just keep that in mind too, and that's all due before the end of the year. So legislative concepts, I know draft ones are due June 1. And budget is probably due September 1. I'm not sure for you guys at DAS, because her budget's under DAS.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what your deadline is for her to submit a budget for 2019, 2021.
I don't know exactly, but I can find out.
And what the process is going to be. Because we have, I mean, in the Secretary of State's office, we have our process, but I don't know if it's the same process as what you guys go through at DAS.
It's the same throughout the state agencies.
Well, see, like for this bunch, the heaviest lift is gonna be the legislative concepts, right, to flesh those out.
Well, it depends on how you feel about my administrative rules.
Yeah, rules.
I mean, we clearly need to get the rules done, but we can do them ourselves. So I mean, it seems to me like we want to get administrative rules finalized as soon as possible so you have a structure around your dispute resolution function, which is one of the sort of central roles you're going to be playing. I don't really know at this point what we have even in mind as possible legislative concepts and whether anything for 2019 that's substantive is even remotely possible.
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of stuff this last session, as Rob so accurately said. This is the most public record change that we've had since it was established in the early 70s. I'm going to be pretty curious to see how this all works before we start introducing brand new concepts that all of our folks are going to have to abide by. But, you know, obviously I'm only one voice.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're clearly charged with looking at a number of things, and the governor's executive order gets at some of those. But if we're meeting quarterly, I don't know that we're going to have legislation for January, even honestly. Like, that's just not.
I agree.
Even if we're meeting quarterly, I think that would be.
Pretty short time.
Yeah, I can't imagine us coming up with anything, but I agree that we should put in a placeholder. Just relating to public records. I don't care what you put in it, maybe just a one-liner that says.
A comma.
Well, maybe repeal the sunset on this council, maybe. Simple
Well, I mean,
one-liner.
there are definitely things like that, I mean, because we would sunset in the middle of next biennium. And so that's one of the things that I think is very important that gets removed from that piece of legislation. There's other things that I think are going to crop up as the more Ginger gets working into this.
Yep.
And I would like to have that placeholder and the ability to put in legislation instead of having to wait 3 more years before, you know, because the short session, the likelihood of getting anything heard in the short session relating to public records is slim to none. So we might as well have that placeholder in there, and if there is something that needs to be changed, to clarify the original piece of legislation or whatever, that we have the ability to do that. And like I said, the one thing is the sunsetting piece, is because we would sunset, and I think it's what, 2020 is what it says.
That's right.
And I guess maybe the point I was trying to make is like how often we need to meet is partly probably going to turn on how ambitious your legislative agenda is. And I don't know if there's time for an ambitious one for 2019, but I think if there are things that we can fix, that should be pretty easy to get this group to agree on that.
I'm guessing I'm guessing the Sunshine Committee probably will have more legislative output or potential than this council will, at least for a while. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how the phasing Sunshine Committee is going, to be honest. We heard the report late this morning in front of the subcommittee of Legislative Council. It looks like you guys are plugging away at your work, but that's a big task.
It's a big task.
It's a monstrous task.
That's a good adjective.
Yeah, so I can see potentially, hopefully, I can't see it in 19 though, maybe 21, legislation completely reforming the 560 odd exemptions or some subset of them. But
There's, well,
there was some unfinished business in 481 too, we might want to consider. Because Rob, I think, I'm trying to remember the phrasing, but there was an issue about public officials acting in their official capacity, making requests. And that came up in the...
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of technical.
I think we would have an interest in pursuing that this time.
We might, but I would consider them
I
more,
do, yeah.
more minor technical fixes that we didn't get baked into 481 because there just wasn't time.
So I do have a few potential thoughts for legislative concepts, that I have on the agenda to discuss later, so I'll probably just put a bookmark on that, until later, but I do think it would be useful certainly for us to address the sunsetting. I also think, in my experience on the federal level, working in legislative advocacy, you have to propose a thing a few times before you actually get the thing you want. And we have to build that time in.
A few times?
Yes, I mean,
Sometimes many times.
on the FOIA Improvements Act, we proposed these things for years and years and years. It died on the floor at one point and then finally got resurrected again and ended up passing. So I think if we were to accomplish anything, we should probably have something prepared for next year, even if it's not something huge and ambitious, which I think the proposals that I have are relatively minor proposals.
I can't wait to hear.
Yeah, I know, I'm just dying.
You might as well skip ahead because we're all dying now.
And not going to apply to cities and counties.
Well, we still
I
want
like it even better.
So we can just eliminate that right now. So let's see where we are. We are running ahead of schedule.
We're still on future meetings, so,
We are
I mean,
still
are
on
you still
future
planning to
meetings, so
just meet quarterly? I mean, I'm okay with that, I think it sounds like that.
I'm okay with that if Les is okay with it.
If we want to accomplish more in a faster period of time, it does seem like we could potentially form subcommittees and do meetings via phone, not necessarily in person. Is that a possibility under the open records law?
Can I ask you, before we go down that path, what type of subcommittees topically are you thinking about?
If some folks are particularly interested in looking at the administrative roles and giving the particularly close look, before taking those administrative roles to the larger committee, that would potentially be useful. We could have a subcommittee studying potential legislative concepts that comes up with ideas and then takes them to the larger committee for a vote.
Just riffing out loud, I mean, my initial take is that it would be nice to try to do this as a body rather than as subcommittees, but I also certainly understand the need for subcommittees if we need to take a deeper dive into stuff that you know, may or may not interest some of us. And so I would suggest that having subcommittees is certainly a possibility, but I think that it would be probably better for all of us to try to work through these things, I think, collectively, unless you need to take a really super deep dive.
And I'm in agreement with Mark. I think we ought to, and I don't have a problem with you scheduling a quarterly meeting, and now knowing your disposition towards meetings, you could schedule them, and then if you got nothing to put on the agenda, you're gonna cancel it. Because you got a big cancel button, it sounds like. So I'm good
Not
with
in
that.
my interest or in our interest to be at a meeting where we're not accomplishing anything.
I just worry about carving us up, because this is a careful balance here. And if you know, let's say Mark, Scott, and I on the subcommittee.
Just randomly selected. We're all gonna get a little nervous. Trust us, we got this.
You'll get back to us.
Any subcommittees that are formed would have to come back to the larger council. This is another question that I had. At this point, we don't have any bylaws, to my knowledge. I mean, I don't even know if we're going to say pass the administrative rules. How many votes does that require? Does it require a simple majority? Does it require 66%? So I think it would be helpful to draft some bylaws. Michael's looking at me like I might be the person who ends up doing that.
When we were looking at, when we had agreed when we were doing the interviews and stuff, it was
That we
going to
work
be,
for consensus.
yeah.
Largely, right?
Or, no, we got to a point too, on some issues, it was just a simple majority.
Right.
And, because we agreed that not everybody was going to rank every candidate the exact same way, so we went with, a weighted thing. So we had formal stuff, but nothing formal, so I mean, that actually can be put into administrative rule too.
But, I mean, I don't think you can fundamentally change, like, if a majority of your members vote to do something, they can, and it's within their authority that, I mean, you're not gonna
Is
be.
a simple majority enough? For instance, if we as a group, if there's a legislative concept that we're discussing and it comes up for a vote, is a simple majority enough for us to go forward with advocating for that concept?
Unless you get the statute changed to require more. Yeah.
Right, I mean, that's.
I mean, that's
So
the
we'll stick
default
that with
rule.
simple majority.
That's the default rule. You could provide for something else in statute.
A minority report.
Well,
I'm happy with the simple majority, I just want to make sure that others are comfortable with that.
So I'm talking things at the same time, which is dangerous, but my experience with councils and committees and statutory bodies like this that make recommendations, I've not seen any of them adopt bylaws because we have a pretty comprehensive public meetings law. What Oregon law does not provide, because it defaults to each group, are rules of procedure. So most public bodies of which I'm aware adopt either Robert's Rules of Order, or if you're a big body, Mason's Rules of Order. So that's typically what I've seen. So I'm not really sure what you'd put in bylaws that would do anything, really, to be honest, because public meetings law is gonna, as Michael says, if you wanted to change the vote requirement, for example, I think you'd have to do it in statute. I don't think bylaws would do it.
So, I mean, I'm happy with that.
I was looking at you because I knew Rob Bovett was gonna raise Robert's Rules of Order.
Well, well, and I just say that because most people, a lot of people are familiar with Robert's Rules, even if they haven't read them. I mean, they're just, they've seen so much TV and so much whatever, and they've watched the process.
They've seen The Wire.
Exactly, so.
They're pervasive in the atmosphere.
Yeah. So I know the legislature goes by Mason's rules, which in some respects are not, the safe way of word.
Ideal?
Okay. And Robert's Rules has problems too, but basically most of the organizations that I'm aware of that are public entities like this operate off of Robert's Rules, except to the extent they conflict with Oregon Public Meetings Law, which they do in many respects. So that's the typical thing that I've seen, but that doesn't mean we have to do that. It's just, that's what I've typically seen.
That's what my Sunshine Committee ended up doing after a long discussion, which I would recommend we short circuit and just go right to that.
Just do Robert's
Just
Rules.
go right to Robert's Rule.
Except it's inconsistent with the Oregon Public Meetings Law.
Right.
That would be kind of interesting. The Public Records Advisory Committee is
Skipping
the one
on
you don't report on.
conversation
We're okay.
about.
I hear nothing.
Wait, what?
I didn't get that one.
Do you wanna have a conversation about it? It's really boring.
So then do we want to formally make that decision that we're going to go with Robert's Rules, except we're in conflict with the Oregon Public Meetings Law?
I would make such a motion.
Second.
Am I a voting member of this council?
You
or-
are.
Yes, you are.
So,
There
I'm
you-
not super familiar with Robert's Rules.
Okay.
but
Now
I'm
you just call for a voting.
No, we call for
No,
discussion.
discussion.
There's been a motion and a second, so any discussion on this motion?
Call the question.
Now you just say all those in favor.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right,
Motion carries.
One less thing you have to write up.
there we go. So
It took,
we'll
you know,
accomplish that.
I guess apropos of like the meetings ahead and the business ahead, or, our quarterly meetings, which I guess we've agreed to now. So just speaking for myself, I think for the administrative rules, my sense is, I tend to agree with Michael that, I mean, I think there's a sense of urgency of allowing you to get underway, so I don't think, my sense is we don't need to have an extensive discussion of administrative rules. We could take care of that today, probably.
We have 30 minutes scheduled for it.
Yeah, that should be fine. And then in terms of legislative concepts, when I think about it, it's like,
So 6 months, and we don't even really have 6 months, it's more like 3 months, right, to actually get something substantive drafted. That seems pretty ambitious, but I also think, you know, we all have, most of us have our history with legislation in the last session, and whether there's unfinished business or whether there's still stuff that we need to see play out. I think we all may have ideas about things that could be improved. And I think it makes sense to go ahead and start having that discussion, even if we can't make September 1st, you know, no sense in waiting around to, you know, we might as well, this is a good time to start having that discussion about whether it's 2019 or 2020 or 21. So I hope that, like, that can actually probably be a big part of those quarterly meetings coming up and maybe starting today.
So how would people feel about meetings if they were shorter and had the availability to really participate via call-in instead of having to come here? Do people feel better about meetings then?
That's a great idea.
I think as long as, you know, like you said, there's something to meet about, but yeah, I think that's really what we need to look at, because if we're going to get something in place for all of these deadlines, then we're going to have to do something then other than in-person meetings. Yeah. It's just too hard to schedule everything with everybody's schedules.
I just to share a piece of my experience with you. When I was running the AG's task force, we would schedule our meetings kind of ad hoc, and it was a nightmare. And with the current Sunshine Committee, I just like put a date on the calendar, and it's regular, and people know, and they can, you know, hopefully mostly make it and calendar around it. And I cannot tell you how much better that is. Like, but unless you're a person who likes scheduling meetings and like trying to get people to respond to doodle polls, but I don't even know people like that. So I would just suggest that you think about, or that we think about setting a regular meeting. And I completely agree we should be talking about possible legislative concepts. My only point really was that if we seriously wanted to do anything ambitious in 2019, we'd probably have to meet like every week instead of every quarter. And I don't think there's.
I think it's also possible that there's consensus items that.
Yeah, I agree.
And we should definitely go forward.
And it's not just the 3 months. Keep in mind, that's just for
that's
filing bills.
And that's for state agencies.
That's for state agencies.
We get until September 28th, where we get to introduce stuff.
Pre-session.
Yeah.
And then we can continue to introduce stuff in a regular session throughout.
Until that ends.
Until they gavel out. So, yeah, I think if we get the vehicle and we reach consensus, we just start this core vehicle with whatever we come up with. Between now and January or February.
And Cameron, I think you had a comment.
So the deadline is for the bill to be introduced. If you're doing a placeholder, there is no other deadline other than middle of March when you have to have a public hearing for it to not be a dead bill. So realistically, as long as they're putting a placeholder in by June 1st, you have no deadline other than the March deadline.
Well, except I think the March deadline won't apply to the bill either, because I'm guessing it'll go to rules. And the rules don't apply to rules.
Right,
Yeah.
so it's tiny that.
Yeah. So it's tiny that.
Yeah, and I think that was our intent, was just to get a placeholder.
Yeah.
So that if there are things in the next couple of months, there's no way.
There'll be plenty of other public records bills, I'm sure.
So we can gut and stuff, huh?
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, then there's that.
They're gonna be your public records stuff.
No, you're gonna introduce one, we're gonna go.
We're just waiting for you guys to introduce.
So, having heard all of this and having had this discussion, how do folks feel about having a meeting in July and one in September? If there's the availability, it will be a shorter meeting. I'm thinking an hour to an hour and a half. And there will be availability for actual participation via call-in. So you won't have to travel here.
The focus being on getting your administrative rules
Administrative rules
if we
and
don't
potential
do that today.
legislative concepts. Mm-hmm. All right. I don't think we have to move on that, right? No, okay. So I will go ahead and look at the dates, and I will contact you and follow up after the meeting. All right. So we are running a little bit ahead of time, which is excellent. So we'll go ahead and, unless anyone has any further comments on these topics, we can go ahead and take about a 10, 15-minute break. Let's say we'll be back at 20 after 2.
Sir.
Did she try both numbers? Do you want to text her both numbers? Yeah, sure. Because she did have both. Oh,
I read them.
Logged on, so I'm hoping that she got it. These are the two numbers. Okay. There was only one posted on the website, I think, so if she tries both of those.
Or emailing you about not being able to go on and see, but
I know.
Oh, how?
I will use that if you want.
you would not be happy if you were not able to call.
So I don't know which one of these is on the website. She should try. So long distance works for free, and then it's back. She is taking that technical equipment. Yeah, leave it. I would pause the recording. People are on break.
Actually, working on it.
All right. So the next item that I have on the agenda is possible legislative concepts. I had a few ideas here that I thought I would throw out there. I'd love to hear your ideas, and I'll discuss these ideas at greater length. The first idea that I had was based on sort of the first experiences that I had when I got here in Oregon. Some of the first questions I had were things like, well, how many public records requests do Oregon state agencies get every year? And nobody seems to have an answer to that question. Or what exemptions are most used by a particular agency or in general? How long, on average, does it take an agency to process a simple request? None of that data is available. So I think it would be great if there was a requirement on the state level for state agencies to track that data and report it annually. There are several ways that reporting could go. It could be reported to the legislature, it could be reported to my office, it could be reported to the general public on the Oregon Open Data website, which I think would be the best option. That would allow the public to see the data and parse it as they wish, and analyze it in their own free time. So I think that would be a good option.
So I'll speak for state agencies. I know that, I agree, I think that we need to be able to track that data and be able to report that data. The issue that we have with agencies, and even within agencies and across agencies, is that we don't have good tracking systems. And so you look at an agency where I came from, working with Les a lot at Department of Corrections, where we have PIOs in 14 different prisons, all using different systems, spreadsheets to track. There's no centralized tracking system within that agency. And then you look at state government as a whole, it would be nice if we all had one system that we could use. And so a legislative concept like that, it would be great if we could, tie some money to it in order to get some sort of system that would work for people.
Maybe we can build it.
I have had initial exploratory conversations because that was something that agencies had brought up to me, that they would like to have software.
Yeah.
When I went up to Portland, I spoke with one of the attorneys for the city of Portland, and she showed me the entire city is using this software, so based on GovQA.
Yeah.
And the front end of this software is a public request portal, where any member of the public can go online, they can make a request online, the request gets routed to the proper agency, they select which agency, they do a description of the record, provide some other additional information, the request gets sent to the agency. The back end of the software is a case management system. And that case management system allows the folks in the city of Portland government to then track the request, respond to the request. There's a correspondence piece of it where they can correspond within that software so that no correspondence gets lost. There are a bunch of other pieces in the case management, and then that back end of the software also generates data. It generates metrics based on, the number of requests received per agency, how long it took for those requests to be closed out. And there's a possibility that something like that, I don't know if if Portland is doing this, but there's a possibility that that could also plug into Oregon's open data portal so that that data could just be generated out to the public. So I spoke with some GovQA folks just to sort of talk about the software. I also spoke with someone at the CIO's office, the state CIO's office. And they have, the e-government folks there have the ability to custom design with a team of people here in Salem, software that would potentially be able to do the same thing. So the question would be, what is always the question, money.
I think there's maybe a second sticky wicket beyond the money, and the time that agencies would spend tracking this data. And that's the fact that, as some of the studies have shown, most public records requests are informal and are dealt with in about 2 seconds. And so, you're talking to someone on the phone from the state agency or at their counter, can I send you that document? Boom, done. So I don't know that people even think of those as a public records request, that they are. And so I suspect that if we were to have state agencies gather that data, it would be, I wouldn't say inaccurate, it would be incomplete. And I would worry about that.
Well, and to follow up on that, maybe an approach, because I'm concerned that you would have created this new step in the process when 90% of requests are handled appropriately.
Just like that.
Right. What if you used it as a tool or an incentive? I'm just thinking out loud that when when you've got a problem agency, right? When you're getting a lot of complaints or things are not going smoothly, some provisions, then you require them to start tracking, so that you use it almost as an enforcement tool to require a recalcitrant agency, okay, you're going to start tracking so that you zero in and use resources of this office and the whole government apparatus to focus on the problem children and not making everyone go through steps that don't gain us any better compliance.
So who would have the authority to impose that?
Well, it's a concept. I just had a fleshed out idea.
But I mean, that would have to be part of the.
I don't know that, yeah, and I don't know that I would anecdotally know when an agency is a poor performer. And the other complication there, I think maybe the AG's office would be in a better position to know which agencies are most frequently challenged, but that's kind of a complicated data point, right? Because maybe there's an agency that receives 10,000 requests a year, and there's another agency that receives 100 requests a year, and the agency that receives 100 requests, maybe 50% of the time they do a bad job processing them, so you hear from 50 requesters, whereas the other agency, has a much larger request pool, so it's skewed. So 50 referrals to the AG for an agency that only receives 100 requests per year would be pretty significant, but 50 referrals to the AG for an agency that receives 10,000 would be pretty insignificant.
We don't get 50 from any of our state agencies, I'm happy to say, a year.
I think, go ahead, Michael.
No.
50 petitions.
No, not from one agency.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But we're talking about public records requests,
Right.
which is a bigger number.
Yeah.
I think there are definitely trade-offs. If there's additional overhead, it also formalizes the process as less than. I mean, if you always have to go through this thing, then it immediately creates an arm's length relationship between the requester and the agency. On the flip side, it does mean that you do have data rather than just hearing, like, people are always complaining about agriculture or whatever. You actually have data that shows those actual experiences. And yeah, it leaves out the instantaneous transactions, but at least it gives you a relative metric, agency A to agency B, that helps the problems pop up.
I think one of the other things that people are missing too is that the really routine stuff, most of that stuff is just pointing them to where it exists online, or they're doing their own. I mean, I think for an individual to go through a portal, I mean, I've actually been able to see the GovQA demo, and it's just as easy for a person, you know, you get a phone call and you're writing down what they're asking for, and then, yeah, you're sending it off. Well, in the GovQA portal, if somebody calls in, you're just filling in their information and you're still sending it off. It's really no more or less time. The stuff, I mean, I know for us, stuff that's frequently asked, we just make it available to the public online. We don't take those requests anymore. And I know of other agencies that have done that too. It's just that it's just there. Go get it. You know, it's free to get and that sort of thing. I think ultimately that's where we want to get. Is for the stuff that's really requested, like for local governments. I know a lot of cities and county councils and city commissioners and stuff like that, they just post their minutes online. And so they don't have to answer that request anymore. But unless we have some data, we don't know what the problem is. And that was with the audit. It was all anecdotal. That was the problem that I had with that audit, is it was anecdotal in that, yeah, we handle our routine requests fine. Well, we really don't know that. And then we struggle with the complex requests. Well, how do we know that if you don't have any metrics to look at?
But there are things that could have been looked at, right? I mean, there's correspondence with people who made public records requests, and there ultimately, even before there was a required acknowledgement in a specific form of response that was required, like there are, in most cases for the last decade, I would say, there are emails, and there would be, like, it doesn't have to be done either anecdotally or by pushing everyone into GovQA. I guess I'd be a little bit like Rob and Les, concerned that adopting software to create the reporting requirement that's uniform is going to basically force people into formal requests and will, I mean, I've heard from people dealing with the city of Portland that that's kind of how it works there now, actually, so.
You had a comment, and then I have a kind of response to that.
Yeah, I just kind of wonder, one, how do other states handle data with public records requests? And two, like, I agree, like, the normal system, just in my experience in requesting police records, you do get an arm's length away type of feeling when you're just filling out a form. So I'm wondering if there is some sort of software development, why not put some message at the top or embed some video with a human person talking? This is the public records portal. You know, this is what it's for. We're here, a phone call away if you have any questions. Here's a frequently asked questions on the records that are commonly asked, and that gives some sort of personal touch instead of just some form to fill out. And it kind of meets kind of a little bit the halfway point. Sorry.
So the software piece is entirely optional. Even the portal piece is entirely optional. None of that is necessarily inherent in a requirement that agencies track the number of requests that they receive and the disposition of those requests. I mean, it's a way of creating accountability. If you don't have any metrics, you don't know who your poor performers are. The public doesn't know. Maybe you know if you're at the AG's office, you know, maybe you have access to the emails and the correspondence, but someone out in the public isn't going to have access to that.
Right.
So, I mean,
An auditor in theory would.
I mean, if you have, I mean, just a simple reporting requirement would encourage agencies to care more about processing public records requests, to care more about meeting the deadlines. I mean, right now,
How I ask, give your FOIA experience, I mean, that's required at FOIA, how does that function?
yeah, it's required by the federal government. There's an annual reporting requirement. Every agency has to report. There's a series of metrics. They have to track the number of requests they receive, what exemptions they're using, how long it takes them to process simple and complex requests, how many staff members they have, which is also helpful for the public to know. If you have a series of grievances against an agency that's receiving, again, 5,000 requests, but it only has 3 staff members, then it's kind of easy to understand what the problem is there.
I guess my question is, what did you see as the accountability effect of that data?
It encourages agencies to care more.
Yeah.
It encourages a higher level of performance.
Right.
You don't even have to really shame people that much. You just post the numbers up online and the numbers are what they are. It also, I think, would be really helpful for knowing what agencies need to be trained on. For instance, if there's an agency that is using a particular exemption frequently, that's maybe where the training needs to focus on that exemption. If there's an agency that's having trouble processing requests in a timely manner, then perhaps there are some ways to address that in training. I mean, it allows for a more tailored training. It allows the public to make more informed decisions about which agency they're directing their requests to, as well as know which agencies are actually making an effort on public records requests. So, I mean, it's sometimes difficult to really convince some portions of agencies. I'd say the records people usually really care about public records requests, but sometimes folks who have other requirements of the agency, who have a different focus, don't necessarily think that public records requests are a primary duty of the agency or an important duty of the agency.
Speaking not so much as a council, but from my previous experience working with an agency, I do know that a lot of employees give out information. And if they're told they have to use that portal, their answer will be, I can't give you that information. You have to call our public records person. So it will, and the other thing is if you have to do reporting requirements, they wouldn't want you to give out that information if it's a quick and easy one. They would want it to go through the official system, because if I can get that out right now, that'll help pad my stats. So I want you to call the public records person. So it will kind of tie up the agencies. I mean, not tie up the agencies, but the public won't get the same service that they maybe get. There'll be incentive to force it through public records requests.
Anecdotally, I have heard that there's a police bureau that now treats victim requests for the crime reports about the crimes that they have reported as public records requests in order to basically do what he's describing. So you can't get the police report that you need to send to your insurance company without submitting a public records request, which is, I mean, we don't want to encourage that, certainly. But I mean, there may be things you could do to dissuade people from.
That certainly has been our experience with the city of Portland. I mean, I just got an email from our city hall reporter that says, every time I ask for a simple report, and they say, go through GovQA. And that's, but could you get around that with training? I mean, basically say, this is not letting you off the hook from talking to human beings. When somebody calls you up and asks for something, that's not, if it's possible for you to give out the record, give out the record.
How long does it, and others may know, how long does it take for a response to come through? Has it been speedier for the more complex requests? And has it taken longer for things that normally people would just print a copy off of?
For Portland, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know offhand, but I could ask.
Sorry, Jenna.
I think that I had asked about comparative metrics when I spoke with the attorney there, and she said that it's difficult, if not impossible, to do comparative metrics because they don't have the data from before they got the software. There's not much to compare to. So I suspect her answer will be the same, but I can ask her that question.
But sort of a looser reporting requirement that would cover when, written public records requests. Especially now that you're required to send an acknowledgement and a specific form of answer. Like, it really ought not be that complicated to arrange. And maybe if we wanted to do it on a state level, I mean, maybe you just want to start by counting email requests, and the easiest way to count those is just require people who are sending acknowledgements to copy a certain state address where you just collate them all, right? And then you're not really reviewing anything about it, or even responses maybe is better. Like, there's now like a formal statutory provision explaining when your response is complete, like what are the things you have to have done. But, so we could think about it. It's a little more limited set, because there probably still are hand-delivered requests, but you could potentially deal with a fairly
Yeah, that's a good idea.
accurate subset of requests and get a lot of the information you want to see.
It doesn't add that much more work, but it does create
Like,
at least some data.
like just CC2.
It also seems like the more targeted data that we want anyway, something that's not a super easy, simple request.
I feel like there are some ways to get at the data without it being too onerous. That's a good idea. There are already requirements built into the system to piggyback off of those. Will probably be a bit easier.
All right, and the ones that like Rob is talking about, those are not getting acknowledgements, because there would be no point in sending someone an acknowledgement of a request that you already fulfilled. So, yeah, I think you wouldn't miss too much of that.
But even if, like, if you just said, yeah, sure, I'll send it to you by email right now on attachment, then go ahead and CC this other address you're suggesting.
Could do that.
Then there's gonna be an FTE on the other side of that address that somebody's gonna have to bake into the budget, which is fine.
Or at least someone who, one of the hats that they wear.
Yeah, some staff are just gonna have to collate all those. I don't know what the volume looks like from the state. I have no clue. I know if you added cities and counties, then, I mean, what does PPB gets, how many requests do they get a month?
I don't remember the number, but I think
Multiple thousands.
it could be, it depends on the month, because if people crash their cars more in the winter, but, for traffic reports, it can be in the 10 grand neighborhood, my understanding.
But it would help the agencies themselves that quantify the budgetary pressures that come from records requests.
Oh, yeah. There would be an incentive to copy in that address every time you provided anything. Yeah. If you did it that simply, you just have to, in providing public records pursuant to a request, oral, written, email, what otherwise, you just copy this email address. I like that. There's somebody on the other end of that email address.
Right, and then I guess we decide how much we want to do with it, right? It's
Yeah.
probably, just counting them is easy. More difficult is maybe figuring out which agencies are, but even that is not going to be that hard in the state system, I don't think. I don't know, we all have, I'm looking at Liz because she and I have this, like, we all have our, like, I have an @doj.state.or.us email address, but if you take the DOJ out, the address still works, right? So there's like the universal @state.or.us and the separate but I don't know if there's anyway, this is probably way too much in the weeds, but in theory, you could do as much or as little as you wanted with the data.
I mean, the most useful data points are probably the number of requests received and how long it takes those requests to be processed.
So then you want the acknowledgement and the sort of final, this is done, right?
Yeah, you'd want that, but in the informal ones that I just described, there would just be one email.
Yeah.
I mean, because that legislation, of the timeliness, but right now, there's no way of knowing if it's being adhered to.
I mean.
Because there is no reporting requirement.
No.
And so you basically have a statute that, unless somebody wants to push the envelope on it, is moot. Because there's no way of seeing our agencies adhering to this statute. And I think that's the problem with a lot of our public records laws, is they have authority, but there's no reporting requirement, there's no follow-up, there's no enforcement. And so if we really want to have public records laws that work in the 21st century, don't we need to figure out how we're going to be able to say, yeah, this worked. I mean, I've actually had a couple of calls from people who said they're supposed to respond to me in 5 days, and it's been 5 days and I've had no acknowledgement. What's the penalty? I mean, or so how do you report that? And if nobody has to submit any kind of data as to what they're doing as far as public records requests, and how does that work? What's the effect of that law?
Well, I think we're all agreeing with that and trying to figure out what's the best way to encourage reporting or to require it even. I don't know. To me, it seems like there's at least the world of email ought to be fairly easy to capture, and then how we deal with the data is a separate problem. But
then you pass off the accountability to somebody else, right?
no. Well, what do you mean to somebody else? We can make Ginger do it. I'm okay with that.
Oh, I'm not collating data. I mean, that would give me another 3 employees for that.
I agree that if you have something in place that agencies are going to be held accountable for what they're doing, then don't do it. I mean, it's like, hey, you've never heard of an agency that's missed their deadline for filing their budget request, because there's a direct penalty for not doing it. So, and this is just from years of experience dealing with public records. As I've always said, is public records are only important when there's a lawsuit, or in the paper world when they were overtaking the office space. That's when people actually paid attention to public records, you know. And so why can't we? I mean, they're a huge asset and they're a huge liability, and so we need to look at them, especially in the world of automation, because there's so much information. So I think we need to look at how do we change our laws or, you know, what are our requirements of agencies so that they make it more of a priority. I'm not saying that, I don't think reporting is necessarily, or using a portal or, you know, is going to reduce the number. I mean, especially I agree with Steve, is there's an education piece. If you can answer the question over the phone, you answer the question over the phone, and do that. But I don't see where it's a negative to say, well, you know, this is going to request is going to take, so we would like, you know, here, I'll put the information in the portal for you if you don't have access to it, so that we can get it and pass it forward, and then we can track it, you know. And it doesn't have to be GovQA, it could be anything. It's just, it needs to be more formalized, so that we have some metrics and or we're going to be fighting this issue 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and that's what, you know, I really do think our laws need to come into the 21st century and address the issues we have with 21st century information.
And helpfully, Executive Order 1805 did encourage the council to develop mechanisms to track requests, responses, and performance metrics, which is also a key piece to being able to identify proactive disclosure documents that we should be posting up online routinely, documents that are most frequently requested. It's difficult to identify target groups and proactive disclosure documents if we don't have any kind of data about which documents that people actually want. Then we're just going to spend a bunch of resources putting things up online that people don't necessarily care about. But I think there's a way to balance the concerns about simple requests that people can call in with a request, and the potential problems of a more formalized process. I do think there's a way to balance that. It's something that I'm happy to research before we next meet, because I think there's a way to balance this out. I mean, I think it would be unrealistic to say that there won't be some additional burden on the agencies. I mean, I think it's disingenuous when people make any public policy argument and they try to pretend that it's cost-free. This isn't cost-free. It is going to take some additional agency effort and time, but I think that the additional time and effort that it takes is counterbalanced by the fact that there will be increased accountability. The public will have more information about the actual function of agencies, and other government entities will have more information about which agencies are performing well and which agencies are performing badly.
Yeah, I just think that if you want to have good data and with some consistency, there's going to need to be some sort of guidance or process or something that will help the agencies.
And I agree with you.
And especially as you speak about 21st century, I mean, many of us in agency land aren't necessarily working with 21st century tools. So, yeah, I think that there needs to be some.
I do think it's cruel to create an additional requirement for agencies without giving them the tools necessary to succeed. You know, the centralized portal is a piece that doesn't necessarily even have to come into play. Like, all of these things are modular, right? You could have a case management software that would just allow agencies to manage public records requests without requiring that folks go through a centralized portal.
Absolutely.
I think
It's a modular solution.
if you define the data points that we want to gather pretty precisely, but didn't prescribe how people gathered them, like you need to use this portal versus use email, I think that probably would accomplish, consistency across agencies in the methodology without being overly prescriptive.
I think you're right. I think definitions are key because even the definition of a public records request, everybody just deals with it differently. Like somebody said the phone call, most people don't consider that a public records request. And then a lot of times agencies will get requests for information from other agencies. So DOC will get requests from DOJ or DHS. A lot of people won't count those as a public records request, but other agencies would count those as a public records request. So I think definitions would definitely help in making the data and the reporting consistent.
So let me do this in the meantime. I will do a little bit of research. I know one of the questions was asked, was what are other states doing? How are other states managing this? So I can do a little bit of research into that, and I can do a little bit of research into how to balance this issue of, we don't want to prevent people from making easy requests. We don't want to slow down or create an additional impediment to a public records request. So the question is how to balance those things. How do people feel about that? So this is additional research happening.
Good.
So perhaps a good job for a deputy. And also,
It's interesting because what was it the late 90s or the early 2000s is when the legislature passed legislation to classify all information 1 to 4. And I can guarantee you, I bet you there's less than half the agencies that have done that. But I mean, if you looked at all the level 1 information that just could be out there, and you never would have to deal with it, it'd be huge. I bet you would reduce a lot of your requests. Well, but it's another piece that legislation gets passed, but there's no way of knowing how it's supposed to be implemented or done. And so I'd like to actually see something that is general enough. This is the information you have to report on. We don't care how you do it, but.
Well, maybe this classification system is something we should explore further. Seriously, it's already on the books. Maybe we need to.
It's already there. It's already legislation that exists. And I know when we have agencies come into our electronic system, we do that for them. And all the one immediately goes out, it's available through the public portal, so that, people don't have to deal with it. But I can probably list the number of agencies that have actually done that.
So what are the classifications?
1 is published, 2 is open. Limited. 3 is restricted, and 4 is critical. Again, critical is defined as would cause massive destruction or loss of life.
You mean if disclosed?
Huh?
You mean if it's disclosed?
If it's disclosed. 3 are the ones that are restricted by a statutory exemption or other exemption, and then the limited are actually, there's no exemption, it's just you want people to come to you to get that information and publish the stuff that can be readily pushed out.
But stuff that's 3 that's covered by exemption, they're still gonna review it for on a case-by-case basis, or they just never disclose it?
No, they have to review it, because the way the law reads is it's a law disclosure, so if you can disclose it, but you have to redact information, you can, but you have to review it before you push it out.
And I think 3 gets way overused on.
3 and 4, I've seen agencies with 4, and it's like, you don't have anything that's 4. There's nothing out there that, I tell people, the things that are listed as a 4, if we had the blueprint to the pin
readily available to, that would be, disastrous, but yeah, I think it is something to piggyback. This whole access piece is we just kind of need to look at it from a different perspective.
So on that note, one of the other proposals that I had, I have a few more minutes for this. When I was doing some research for my website, hoping to list agency websites and contacts for public records requests, I noticed that a lot of agencies don't have any website with instructions for where to direct a public records request, and certainly haven't designated anyone that you can pick up and call if you have a question about a public records request.
That's not even a new law requiring that. When did you get that one passed, Rob?
No, it wasn't Rob, it was Mark and I, and, it was Mark, myself, Tom Gallagher, so, a bunch of other people who are now retired.
Like 07 maybe?
It was the 07 session, that was what we negotiated.
So this is
No,
already,
I remember it vividly, it was 07.
what was required already, or?
That you were, that you.
Well, have a
It did a couple things. One of them was the point of contact, so you had to list a specific person by name for the agency public record, for the public, as the public record contact. For my members, it's pretty simple, because all our members are required to have a recorder. So that's usually the person, but,
and the
it also
policy
changed,
for
it also
how,
put the requirement in that said, without undue delay, which I think which was left intact when we did the bill.
It's still in the statute, but it's not really a hard requirement. If you have, the way I read it, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but if you don't designate someone, there's a consequence to that, which means your clock starts ticking as soon as anyone in that agency receives the request. Whereas if you have a designated person as the public records official, in order for the 5-day clock, the 10-day, any of the clocks under the public records law to start, you have to get it to that person.
pretty sure you're required to have a point of contact and a policy, like, it's a shall.
Yeah, it also has the requirement that you post the policies or the procedures for.
But is that an affirm, do you have to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'm missing that.
Give a sense of where in the statute that is.
I used to, but then that guy renumbered the whole thing, so.
I'm like, well, they didn't do it.
Yeah, it's for-
But it's definitely, I mean, that's an issue that should be fixed I would think by executive action, and that we should just, that would be an easy recommendation for us to make to somehow get that information, and maybe it's been a part of DOJ's training, so maybe it should be something that's part of your training. Like, agencies should know that they're required to have these policies publicly available.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something I'd be happy to include in my training, if it's a requirement already.
The policy.
Yeah. If we're still talking about potential changes of the statute, we did have a bill last session, the local government associations ran on, linking on a public note, electronic public notification, that made it subscribable and put all of them in the form. We don't categorize one before, but essentially, any document that was related to a public meeting that was posted on that, was posted. We're open to discussions with the parties as to whether a similar bill might look like going into 19.
Yeah.
I forget the number of it, Rob, you remember?
I'm sorry, was that?
The public notice bill,
Oh, gosh, I don't remember that.
310 or something.
It was in the 300 series, yeah.
Yeah.
310 or 11 or 12 or something.
Is that something we could distribute to discuss at the next meeting?
Sure.
What's that section?
It's 192-324 subsection 7.
Yep.
Public body shall make available to the public a written procedure for making public records requests that includes A, the name of one or more individuals within the public body to whom public records requests may be sent, with addresses, and B, the amounts of and the manner of calculating fees the public body charges for responding to requests for public records.
So law
And that's not
it
new.
says shall.
No,
That is not new.
it says shall. Public body
Law
shall make
agencies
available.
are not doing that.
Well, and we need to talk about fees too, eventually.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. We have to.
Can we do that like in 2020 or 2021?
No.
We have to do it now.
What's that?
Let's talk about these.
Oh, well, so my predecessor is Matt Shelby, so he was on this council before me, and so he led the public records management, work group that met over the last, I don't know, I can't remember, year and a half or two. And I was on the work group as a member of an agency, and that group did a couple of things. One was, they created a statewide policy on records management that each agency has now adopted, and so we're in 100% compliance with that.
Well, actually, you're not. Every agency, unless they filed an update since last legislative session, is out of compliance because of the changes to the public records law.
So, yeah, so that's my next comment was, I'm just looking at the policy now, realizing that we need to make changes to it based on the legislation that was passed, particularly around timelines. So that work needs to be done. But putting that aside for a second, the second piece of work that the group completed was the development of a statewide standard fee structure for public records requests. And so we have a policy that we've created, but we haven't adopted the policy because we wanted to go through formal rulemaking so that if there's ever a change to it, that agencies don't have to go and change their rules. They can just point to the DAS rule. And so I wanted this body to review that policy that we drafted, if you haven't seen it in a while, and see if you have any recommendations or comments, so that we can move forward with rulemaking.
That policy is publicly available, right?
It is, I brought copies for everybody, but it is on our website, so I'm happy to send out a link if that's better for people, but I have hard copies as well.
I think I also have it linked in the resources section of my forthcoming reiteration.
What's the time frame for that?
Well, it was one of the SOS audit recommendations, and what we recently told Secretary of State was that we would move forward with rulemaking so that we would have it adopted, I think we said by fall or by the end of the year. So we wanted to move the process forward fairly soon so that we have the comment period and time for that.
So what you'd like from us is for us to review it and give you feedback?
I would love that. And so maybe I'll just send it out in an email to the group, if that works.
Yeah, and that, by the way, is part of what Executive Order 1805 encouraged us to do, move forward on a statewide standardized fee structure. Do others have ideas for potential policy or legislative changes?
There's been an issue that came out of Portland with how long they're leaving the requests open. I think in 481, it was, so someone makes the request, you acknowledge, you respond with a request for clarification, or you have a question about it. If you don't get a response within, I think in the bill, it was 60 days. You're leaving that open. That seems long. And I don't remember why we chose the 60 days as the threshold. If you're not getting a response, it seems to me that if you're not getting a response, at least within the timeline, the clock, that seems like you should be able to close out that request.
Mm-hmm.
If someone wants to make a new request and say, well, we're going to revisit this, that's fine, but I don't know that we should be leaving that open for 2 months if you're not getting a response back from the requester. And I remember the conversation as to why we chose that.
You do?
I remember that we had a conversation.
I do not even remember.
Why, it was in your office in the conference room, but there was some rationale for it, but I can't.
Are you sure it wasn't just like randomly picked a number out of the air?
Actually, I think Rob did it, so.
Oh,
So do you want to shorten the time window, or just?
Yeah, I think if you're not getting the.
Actually close the request?
I think you just, no, I don't want to shorten the time window. I'm going to say that if you don't get, I think it's 15 days after you get the request, if you don't get a response back from, or if you ask for the deposit because they've asked for a fairly complicated request, or they're just not communicating with you, that you should move on.
Yeah, I mean, that to me seems reasonable coming from the federal government. That's one of the rules there, that agencies can administratively close a request if there's a request for clarification and the requester just never responds, or if there's a fee issue and the requester just never responds.
What timeline is in federal rules or statutes?
It leaves it up to the discretion of agencies.
Because Scott's right, I do remember writing. Yeah, it basically says if the requester fails to pay the fee within 60 days, and then there's another provision here, basically, the public body shall close the request.
That's ambiguous.
Yeah.
So the way there's two ways you can look at it. When you say shall close, is that closing administrative by law? Or does that mean you have to close it if it's still open at that time? So you could look at it as you can close it in 2 weeks, but you have to close it within 60 days.
That's the way.
And that's the way that I think is probably the correct interpretation, but you could also interpret it, you have to leave it open for 60 days, which is what some are interpreting it as.
So what are you asking for?
I would say you should, I mean, if we have the 15-day timeline on the request, that if the requester goes silent for 2 weeks, for that 15 days, you should be able to close it.
I think give them the same separate 15 days.
15 business days.
Yeah.
Okay.
15 business days.
15 business days from the time that the agency requests further information.
From the point you ask for, you issue the request, the clarification request, ask the question, do any of those responses that are allowed in the statute that require the requester to respond back. If they go silent, then they can just make a new request.
Seems fine. 3 weeks, guys.
Start the time ticking again.
So you can mail it out.
By the way, I did find.
The post office, that's the only thing I can see is that you're losing time if you mail it out. But if you're electronically communicating, I can see people coming up and saying, well, I didn't receive it from the post office. That was 5 days that went by and I mailed it back, and that was, I mailed it back within the 15 days after I received it, So I'm just playing the devil's advocate here, but if you're using it, regular mail, U.S. mail, you may have an issue. But I think.
I don't think we get many of those.
Pardon?
I don't think we get that many of those.
Yeah, I don't, and then again, that's, I'm just playing the devil's advocate because I know somebody will come in and testify that, hey, I didn't receive it from the post office until a week after they sent it, so.
I guess I'm missing something. Probably am. If the agency sends out an app and you don't hear back, right? The agency's not taking any other action anyway. It's sitting in limbo, right? It's not proceeding on the request. What do you gain other than administrative tidiness by the declaration that you shall close out the request?
I think Portland can explain the issue better because it impacts them more acutely than other members because of the volume. But they get a lot of requests from folks who are it's not in your profession, it's other folks, and you guys are on deadlines. But it does create an administrative burden for them to leave this request open for that long, because they want to be able to say, so they want to be able to allocate their work and say, we're working on this request, but if we don't hear back from them, it just leaves it open and it's untidy.
Well, but they're not doing any additional work until they get a response.
Right, but they have to have someone available to work.
Yeah,
I think is what he's saying.
Yeah, it's really about organizing your work so that so you're responding to
Well, why couldn't they just, on their own motion, just put it in a dead file? I mean, I'm just curious why it needs to be a statutory mandate.
I don't think we're asking for a mandate, we're just saying that I think we may terminate a request after, if the requester goes silent after 15 business days,
I know on the
they can
federal,
make a new request.
on the federal level, they allow for the administrative closure of requests, in part because they have the reporting requirements, and if they have, it stacks up hundreds of requests over time that never get closed, it really skews all of the data. And I don't know if Portland cares about those sorts of things, but if you have a whole bunch of just open requests, it looks like you're taking a long time on average to process things. It's not necessarily accurate.
I think it'd be important to give notice to the requester at the front end, like, this is what will happen.
Yeah. So if we do that as part of the acknowledgement, we include a notification that if we don't hear back from you from this time, we would restart the clock.
And on the restart the clock, I did find that other thing I was remembering, which I think is more for staff. So my members, I read them the Riot Act in last November, and I said, everybody, if you don't have a policy and it's not posted online and you don't have designated public records official, get it before January 1. And I remember this because from the bill, and I didn't write this one, I think you wrote it, this one, which is basically says, your clock starts ticking when the designated public records person gets it. I think arguably by negative implication, if you have a state agency that has no policy, has no designated person, I do think the clock arguably starts ticking as soon as anyone in that agency gets that request, even if they ignore it.
I agree.
And so there is a consequence to not having a designated public records person or persons and not posting it online and having that policy there.
So that consequence is only as good as people's knowledge that the agency isn't meeting its deadline.
That's true. That's also true, but there are,
They don't know how to request
there
records.
are a number of sophisticated public records requesters in Oregon, including some of those on the other side of the table here. Anyways.
So let's see. We are right at 3:10, which means we should probably move along. Let's have more of this discussion at the July meeting. In between then, I'll do research on the topics that I mentioned. If others want to think about potential proposals that we could discuss, that would be great. Maybe prepare something beforehand, even potential language if you want to go that far. We can discuss it at that meeting. So the administrative rules, I distributed copies of these to everyone. Now, there was one small change that I made at the very end based on the conversation that I had the other day. We can cover that as we go through this. So, I guess we can maybe just go through it section by section, if that makes sense. If folks have any comments on the definition section.
Why do you feel like you need an authorization permitting you to share name and information with the government body? Is that like a privacy act
I
thing?
mean, it's a privacy thing, probably coming a lot of my experience with the Privacy Act, but I don't know, I would feel uncomfortable without that authorization as an attorney.
Even though they're coming to you to meet you? I mean, I think it's fine, honestly, it just struck me as a little.
I mean, I think it also just sort of helps, to make sure that we're on the same page, right? Like, all right, you came to me, now I'm gonna go and talk to the agency on your behalf. Are you all right with me talking to the agency on your behalf? Especially since some of these are dealing with sensitive issues, like, I mean, I had one request from someone who was a domestic violence survivor, and I was contacting folks at circuit court about records. I mean, I can't do that as a formal facilitated dispute resolution, but I can do it as assistance to someone. I mean, it's a potentially private and sensitive issue. I prefer to have people's authorization to discuss.
Do you think that there's a risk that you create more of an expectation of like external confidentiality? Like, I mean, I don't think the statutes make it confidential if someone requests your services in general. I guess I'm a little worried that by authorizing you to share with the agency that you may be setting up an expectation on their part that you're otherwise gonna protect information you might not be able to protect.
I don't know, see, if someone asked me if they had my authorization to disclose my information, I wouldn't assume that that's an implication of confidentiality. I don't know.
And elsewhere in the rule, it specifies confidentiality of all communications.
Right, within the mediation, but not like the fact that you ask the mediator to be involved is not mediation communication.
I mean, I think I can spell it out more clearly that there isn't an expectation of confidentiality if it's not a mediation under the rule.
Yeah, I'm not gonna refuse to vote for these because of this, and, I mean, I was worried that someone might read that and think that it's a secret that they're asking you to be involved, which probably not generally going to be.
I mean, if it's a secret that they're asking me to be involved, then they would just say, I don't authorize you to share my information. I mean, the authorization would be to share necessary information in order to resolve your question. I mean, what I don't want is an instance where, let's say someone who's a domestic abuse survivor calls me up, they want me to contact the court to try to find it, because they can't seem to get a hold of a record for their domestic violence case. I contact the court and I mention that the court clerk, and I'm gonna have to give the person's name, potentially the name of the defendant, the name of the victim. And then if I have that victim come back to me and say, well, why did you tell the court clerk my name? I mean, I just would be very uncomfortable with that as someone who's worked in privacy for a long time. I would much rather be sure that that person is okay with me sharing their name and information.
Maybe you then just wanna ask for it in specific circumstances. Like, make it a requirement if requested, right? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, I think it could be a good place to communicate that if we're not in mediation, there isn't an expectation of confidentiality. If it doesn't fall under the formal mediation confidentiality rules, then there's no expectation of communication confidentiality. So maybe instead of that authorization, then it becomes a clear communication of expectations regarding confidentiality. That if we proceed with this, if it's not a formal mediation, we don't have an expectation of confidentiality.
I guess I'm not sure that even in a formal mediation, the fact that and you talk about the agreement at the end is not confidential. The agreement to mediate is not confidential. But in a lot of this process, it is not going to be confidential.
But the authorization is an acknowledgement of the fact that it's not confidential.
But it's limited
It's a
to,
statement that says, that this isn't confidential, and you're okay with that.
well, it could be more of one then, because it's limited to sharing your name and information with the government body to the extent necessary, which suggests that you're not, I mean, if I read that and I were not knowledgeable, I think it would suggest to me that she's only gonna use my name and this information to give it to the government body to the extent she needs to. It feels to me like you're promising me more confidentiality than I think you actually can promise.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So how would you change that? I mean, I want the person to know that there isn't an expectation of confidentiality, especially because some of these records touch on sensitive issues. I want them to know that their name is potentially going to be disclosed, their information is going to be disclosed as part of this process. So how would you draft that up to make sure that they're informed of that?
You want me to write something right now?
I mean, I would love it if you would make a proposal.
Okay, I will sit here and write for a minute.
All right, I'm just asking because I'm going to have to go back and redraft this, and in order to sort of respect your suggestion here, I'd like to make sure that I actually know what the suggestion is, while at the same time balancing the concerns that I have about the privacy issue.
So while we're on the topic of confidentiality, just jumping ahead to a different section, but is the confidentiality of communications during mediation, specifically regarding whether it's admissible in future litigation, so is that what we have here? Is that defined in is that set in statute, or is that your? Okay.
Exactly, it is set in
Okay.
statute, and I spent days trying to answer this question. And I will tell you that the model rules on confidentiality and mediation, whoever wrote them, should go back to law school. It was torture. I had a hard time as an attorney with
I think Rob did that.
I did not. They were terrible and onerous, and if it were my choice, I would not be incorporating them by reference in these administrative rules, because I think they're not user-friendly, and I think rules like this should be user-friendly. But in order to be able to ensure the confidentiality, which I think is necessary for mediation, I have to adopt those rules by reference, or copy and paste them wholesale, which I think would be even worse. I could find no way around it.
You have to do more than that, though, because the way this mediation confidentiality works is weird. Okay, there are two default rules. There's a default rule if a state agency is involved in the mediation, and then there's a default rule for any other circumstance. And the default rule if a state agency is involved is no confidentiality. And to get around that, you have to both adopt the AG's model rules. I won't tell her what you said about it.
She didn't draft them.
She didn't write them personally, of course.
I'm certain she did. She's a much better attorney.
But so not only do you have to adopt that, but you actually have to have a mediation agreement that specifies the extent of the confidentiality. So even adopting the AG rules doesn't actually get you out of the default. It just allows for an agreement that then gets you out of the default, which is very convoluted, right? On the other hand, if a state agency is not involved, the default is it's confidential and not admissible. But you can still sign an agreement that provides otherwise.
It just seems like if you are the requester and you go on to litigation, and I guess you are able to say there was a finding of bad faith, for example.
Yes, that would be in the mediation agreement, which would not be confidential.
But you're not allowed to show all the communications that led to that determination. You have to show how egregious the behavior was that led all records advocates to find that behavior.
Yeah.
So, but nothing we can do about that. Well, maybe there is a legislative proposal.
I mean, if it were my choice, I would have adopted the rules that the Office of Government Information Services has.
Mhm.
I mean, you can look at their regulations deal with mediation confidentiality, and they strike a good balance.
Mhm.
But I found, I mean, there was not really an easy way for me to get around this. So, and it does, I do believe I say in here, and it would be the mediation agreement that has that finding of bad faith, because that's a separate document. There's something else that's mentioned in here. But it wouldn't be confidential. The finding of bad faith is not confidential. It's not considered a mediation communication. Any other comments on the definition section?
On 2D, wouldn't you find it helpful to not only know the name of the government body, but the principal individual involved?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I can add that to the consent form as well. All right. Anyone have any further comments? Dispute resolution services.
So this is a totally picky copy editor thing. In paragraph 10, the second clause, and resolving the dispute. Resolving a dispute does not constitute a finding that the party did not comply. Can we avoid the double negative? You didn't say that the party failed to comply with the ORS 190.
Yes.
So copy editing on number 6, I think you're missing just a word after the office. I think you wanted to say the office offers, it's like number 5.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Little copy editing on number 8, sub B, I think there should be the word state before agency at the end of the line.
You're right.
Likewise in E, little e.
I wondered in number one if non-exclusive is really helpful. I don't know. Seems like,
Well, it's to tell people that if you choose this service, it doesn't mean you can't also appeal to the AG or the district attorney. There might be a better way to make that, more human language instead of lawyer language.
yeah, I feel like
So I will
the
spell
only
that out.
people who are gonna know that are people who are lawyers who know it's not exclusive.
But it's also non-exclusive alternative to a petition. It's not just litigation. It's a petition to you or to a DA, right?
I mean, I think,
I will spell that out.
yeah,
To say, basically, in essence, you can still
this
take your
doesn't
dispute up
prevent
with
you
the
from,
Attorney General. You
yeah.
have other remedies available to you via court or the Attorney General or the district attorney.
I think that's a,
And I'll reference the statute too, the relevant sections of the statute. Other comments?
so number 3, this gets to the convoluted rules, but, you follow confidentiality requirements and you adopt by reference these rules. And then you go on, therefore, the office will not disclose mediation communications unless an exception applies. But the problem is, as I kind of laid it out, the default of a state agency is involved is that it's not confidential, right? So it's kind of, like, I don't know. I understand how the mediation rules make this a frustrating exercise, but in fact, it's the default in your state cases at least is that unless they agree otherwise, it's not confidential. It's hard to say that you won't disclose them unless an exception applies. You almost like have to disclose those unless an exception applies.
Okay, so I will scratch that sentence. I mean, the problem is I feel very bad sending any member of the public to those model rules to try to discern anything from those rules. They're exceptionally non-user friendly, and I think an ordinary person or even a good lawyer can read those rules and not have any idea what confidentiality they're entitled to.
That's because the rules don't decide that. The agreement that you sign after the agency adopts the rules is supposed to set out the confidentiality. Like, the rules literally don't say, that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
They
So
leave it.
I'll just say in there something about it being spelled out in the agreement.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt the
No, you should interrupt
flow.
it.
I have to leave a little bit early due to a conflict. Are we gonna be deciding on these today, or are we taking time to review them more closely?
Well, it has to go through the formal APA process, so this is just to
But in terms of our
get her a
review.
draft. Oh, yeah, and this is just to get her a draft so she can then go publish it, and then we have we have to take public comments, and then we have to formally act. So this is just kind of step 1.
So I guess to fine tune my question a little bit more, can we give you feedback over email with everyone CC'd, or is that kind of?
Don't do that. Because
Yeah,
that's-
I'm been told that's a violation of.
public meetings law, potentially, so please don't do
Oh,
that.
a
But
public-
giving her feedback, giving Ginger feedback, more feedback on these, it will work up until the point that Ginger decides to send it to the, Secretary of State
Well, the
publisher.
issue, do we need a vote on this to send it
Oh,
along?
right, because
That's
we
what
have
I'm-
to.
Well, yeah, but here's my
Delegate.
suggestion, and this is the way I've seen it work at other states. For what it's worth, at this stage, so I've been doing most of the rule writing for the Criminal Justice Commission, upon which I sit, for various statutes. And so I would craft the rules, present it to the commission, and then we wouldn't take a vote. We would just have a consensus to move forward, and that would just cause the executive director, in this case Ginger, to go publish this and start taking public comments. We would never actually vote on it until public comments were through and we were sitting here voting on the final rules, whatever those look like, with whatever change. So, I mean, we can do that model, or you could take a vote saying, okay, make the changes, Ginger, and go charge forward, but really, I don't see a point in voting on this today.
Okay.
Once we give her all of these fixes, plus whenever she sets a deadline, I don't know when do you want to publish this
As soon as possible.
thing? Okay.
I would like to publish it in June.
So then you probably want to give everybody here a firm deadline, saying, if you got more comments, tell me by whatever it is.
Well,
So, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it sounds like, if we want to have further substantive discussion on changes to this proposal, I mean, it seems like that's something we need to deliberate on through
Today, yeah.
today.
At least for the initial draft that she's going to
I'm
publish.
just gonna go to the public and.
Because how the administrative rules process works is we have to give her the authority by the way the statute works. The council is responsible for giving Ginger the authority to go ahead with doing the rules. That's how and so she can publish the rules. She can notice it and publish it. And it still leaves it open, nothing is set in stone until after the hearing. And then the deadline for public comment. And then at that point, if there's anything else, if we hear something in the public hearing, or we get comments that we want to reconsider, then yes, we would need to reconvene as a body to say if we were going to go forward, give her the authority to go forward and actually adopt it as a permit. But we have that time period while it's being noticed and while we're having a hearing and while we're leaving it open for public comment.
So it sounds like we don't actually need to vote today. Correct?
Well, you could, or it doesn't, you need direction from
I
this,
mean, I
one
think
way or
direction,
another.
I would very much prefer to not wait until our next meeting before I can go ahead and publish this.
Yeah, and I think for non-substantive things, it's
Yeah.
fine to do that over email.
Yeah.
For something that needs to be actually coming from the body through deliberation would be done through a meeting.
Okay.
But
I'm
is that
I'm
happening?
Just email from you to Ginger. Yeah, just nobody else.
Yeah, I guess we're kind of, we can take it on faith that you're not gonna have, like, you're not gonna rewrite this whole thing.
Right, I'm just talking
I would
about.
say if you have,
gives
if you have substantive comments on this, let's cover them now. Let's focus right now on substantive comments. If people have copy editing comments, do send them to me individually without CCing the whole group and creating a forum. If you have copy editing comments or just more minor comments that you don't think would bear group discussion, then let's cover that via email to me individually. But if you have more substantive comments that we should decide on as a group, let's do that now before you have to leave. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Is that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you want, I hate to throw this out there, do you want things quicker than we would next meet after you publish and we go through the public comment period? Do you want, for example, temporary rules before you have permanent rules?
I don't think I need them.
Okay. I'm just throw that
No,
out.
but I appreciate the option. I do appreciate that, the thought. So do folks have other substantive comments on this section?
Are we still on
We were on dispute resolution services.
So number 7, so you said at the start that you expect a lot of your time will be fielding questions from the public on just general stuff. So number 7 is kind of important, and I feel like even with the leading clause, at its discretion, when I see the word discretion, it makes me think like whoever would be, picking to serve and help Jane Doe over John Doe based on reputation. And I know that's not even. I would just maybe take that out, and it'd be great to maybe, I don't know if it's worth the line to kind of explain a little further how you would weigh helping, general questions, given, that you and one other person with staff versus the X number of caseloads or whatever, but just to kind of give a better sense that you're handling, probably a large number of requests so that people get a better sense.
So do you think it would be okay to just say when time and resources allow, the office may offer informal public record assistance?
Yeah, I think that's great.
And I think also in there, I should also say that I will offer assistance to agencies, because it makes it sound like I would only be answering questions for requesters, but for government entities as well.
I have an exclamation point by 5 or more years after the agency's decision on the records request. That's a long time.
So that's based on a record retention requirement. Stephanie and I had a conversation about it. I'm not wedded to that limit. I just needed the number and we needed something to base it on. So it's based on record retention of public records request. It's 5 years, the record retention clause, if I'm recalling correctly, and Stephanie's not here right now. But if you want to change it, we can change it.
I would make it way shorter than 5
Okay.
years.
So where was that one?
Like, this is 8E. I would say if they haven't asked for your help in generously a year, but like maybe like a month.
Let's say 1 or more years.
That's being nice, honestly, like, there's a good chance, not a huge chance with 1 year, but it's still a good chance that people at the agency may not even be there after a year. They may have no idea what you're talking about.
I can see circumstances where we, where, I mean, we, you know, new things would come to light after.
Yeah, the retention on the public records request law and that sort of thing is 5 years, and that is because of the frequent flyers that come back.
I mean,
And that was based on administrative need, it was not based on legal or fiscal, it was just most agencies that we solicited, you know, they wanted that information because if they were continually having to go back with the same person, it is long, but if we say that they can get rid of this, then we're gonna need to change the retention period because.
Why does the retention period have to relate to how long after they can ask for?
Because the records won't exist. So what's the sense of having the retention at 5 years if the request doesn't exist?
Well, no, we wouldn't be changing anything about the retention. We would just be saying if your complaint is more than a year, or pertains to a request more than a year old, we won't necessarily offer you mediation.
Oh, okay, then,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine, yeah, then I would cut it down to a year.
And this is a May, and I would cut it down to a lot shorter. Because it just says May,
Okay.
doesn't mean you can't.
6 months?
And the worst that's
You have
gonna
to also-
happen is they have to make the request again,
Again.
like, which is fine. If it's been a year, they probably should anyway, honestly.
Yeah, I'm thinking mostly of the unsophisticated requester who suddenly discovers that there is a public records advocate and a
Okay.
mediation service that exists.
Maybe a year is okay. 5 is crazy to me.
We'll say 1 year.
5 years ago,
When we're editing things, I think the when at the beginning of D&E needs to be stricken, and they just need to start with
Okay, yeah,
because when is already out with the header.
okay.
And then there needs to be a semicolon and an or after E, the end of E.
Okay, great. All right, other substantive comments? All right, substantive comments on requesting mediation services.
just the same comment on authorization. How about an acknowledgement that the advocate may share your name and other information you provide?
Okay, that sounds good.
Wait, is that in the first section or in this section?
It's here again, it's in
What number is that?
2E.
Okay.
It's the same thing, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For requesting mediation service, on the top of page 3.
it's the same complaint definition essentially as on the first page.
So you said, an acknowledgement that the office may share complainant's name and other information. What was the rest?
I said your name and information you provide, but whatever.
Then you'll need an and at the end of D,
Okay.
after the semicolon.
Others?
Number 3, I think it's a little bit ambiguous, the wording. I was going to suggest, I think what you mean is that when you say a failure to authorize, you mean a mediation request that fails to authorize the sharing?
If a complainant fails to authorize.
Yeah, okay, so if a complainant fails to authorize the sharing of necessary information, it may lead the office to close the case.
The office may close the case?
Yes. Yeah.
substantive comments. And again, you can send me a copy of the stuff, via email, just because I want to be sensitive to the time constraints.
6D, what did you mean there? The A to mediate?
An agreement to mediate.
Oh.
Sorry, I fixed that in my draft.
I have a copy, maybe.
It needs to be
Oh, sorry.
and after C, after the semicolon.
All right, comments on deadline for formal mediation.
I do have a comment, and it starts on number 7 before the deadline. So I think that might be the first time we start mentioning days. Do we need to, is this a business day or just regular day? I don't know.
You're right, calendar days, I think. All right, deadline? All right, anyone have comments on mediation process? Confidentiality,
I would maybe say in number 1, that under these rules, the mediation agreement you sign will determine the extent to which information is confidential.
I am going to restate there that we are adopting by reference the rules of the Attorney General.
Right, I'm just saying it, if you want to explain them a little bit to
Okay.
people, they're really like their fundamental import is, under these rules, you can sign an agreement that can make these things confidential.
Okay.
But unless you do that, they mean nothing. Like if you just sign an agreement that just says not admissible, then it will only mean they're not admissible, right? If it doesn't say anything, then the default rule still applies. So basically just highlighting that the agreement is really, that you sign is really important.
So under these rules, the mediation agreement signed by the parties establishes the level of confidentiality.
Something like that, yeah. Sounds very good. And then on number 2, similarly, it would be unless the parties agree otherwise.
Okay. All right, confidentiality of mediation agreement.
So you successfully, mediated something, that agreement will be public, I wonder, is it worth putting what information will be in the overall agreement, like in general?
I would ordinarily put that, but I think that the mediation agreement will probably say what's confidential and that could affect what's in the final agreement. Or the agreement to mediate that we're talking about with confidentiality, it could be that the parties want to adjust the level of confidentiality, so then there would be more.
Oh, that's what I'm
Will be
asking.
withheld. If they want more disclosed, we'll disclose more. So it's kind of adjustable per the agreement between the parties. So I don't necessarily want to constrain.
So there's no cookie cutter agreement template or something that says, at the very basic, all mediation agreements will have names of the parties and,
Yeah, I mean, I
blah, blah,
think we could probably do that.
You could adopt an agreement as like one that you would always accept. I don't know that you can constrain parties to sign it.
Yeah.
Kind of like a model agreement.
Yeah.
But then should I be memorializing that in the rules?
If you do, we can always add it. It doesn't have to be put in at this point if you don't have one.
Yeah, because I don't have anything like that drafted.
Yeah, we could do separate rules.
Comments on conclusion of mediation?
I was curious, and I'm glad that Cameron's still here. Can a public body in good faith really withdraw from mediation at any point? Or, like that first one, is that true?
That is a good point.
I thought we were required, or not we, the state agencies defined it 192, are required to participate in mediation. So I don't think they could say, okay, I'm participating as required, and then they say, I'm withdrawing.
I withdraw.
Okay, so strike that.
That's possible.
That's a good point.
Yeah, just leave it alone.
Other comments on that section?
On the conclusion,
completion of mediation.
So, several places you make references to a finding of bad faith. Is it your expectation that you simply would declare there was bad faith, or would there be some narrative to define what the bad faith was?
I think that there would have to be a narrative defining what the bad faith was, just for the purposes of it being useful before the court and the attorney fees questions.
You can either or after 3D.
Okay.
And I won't say any more of those, other than on the last one, sorry.
I will go through and look for each instance of
Yeah,
that.
on the last one, you've got semicolons, and I don't know whether to suggest an and or an or. I think actually replace all the things in one with periods would be better on that last one.
Okay.
That's just my suggestion.
So in letter F, in the case of a requester, it's talking about finding bad faith. In case of a requester, failure to give timely notice of desire to opt out of the mediation process, that could be prompt of finding a bad faith. I presume that failure to give timely notice refers back on page 4, top of the page C, where the requester must give written notice of a desire to opt out of mediation within 5 days.
Yes, that's required under the statute, but maybe that's not a reason for a finding of bad faith, although I don't know, if an agency refuses to, it's complicated. Maybe I should retract that.
I'd be fine with that too. I was just gonna say that we should at least specify, I mean, that, I thought originally, because I still have the option after 5 days to opt out later on. And that shouldn't be a result in a finding of bad faith.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So I'll scratch that.
Okay.
So I did add one provision. When I had sent this around to you, there was a piece that I hadn't thought of, and that under the statute, agencies are not required to share any necessary documents with me. The remedy that I had discussed with a few other people is to potentially say, look, agency, if you're unwilling to share necessary documents as part of the mediation process, that is essentially not engaging in a meaningful way. So that could be grounds for a finding of bad faith. So, and that is in here, but it was not in the document that I sent around to all of you originally, because I hadn't thought about that. So any other comments on the imposition of penalties finding of bad faith section?
I wonder if all of these might be more, I mean, you might, the way they're currently characterized, and this is about, I guess, the introductory language, is like, these are examples of scenarios, but maybe they're more like, I don't know, like factors you'll be considering. I don't know if you necessarily want to bind yourself to every time someone opts out, there's going to be a, but these are the kinds of things you would consider in a finding of bad faith.
I mean, it says may be justified in a variety of scenarios, including but not limited to.
Yeah.
Sort of hedgy.
It's hedgy.
It's lawyery, hedgy language.
But it still suggests these are scenarios that,
Well, I could change it to maybe considered in a variety of scenarios, including but not limited to.
yeah, it's probably not that important, honestly.
All right, so do we want to go ahead and take a vote?
Sorry, I'm not even sure, I don't know that I even, really even my issue, but can you really get to a defining of bad faith for if an agency does something that the statute doesn't require them to do? I mean, if we say that they're not required to share documents, if there's no requirement to share certain information.
There's a requirement that they participate in the mediation.
Right.
If I can't obtain the necessary information in order to do my part of the mediation, I think that would be pretty difficult.
And any information they do share with her is specifically protected.
It may be a question, if we're gonna do a bill, then maybe that gets clarified, that there's a requirement.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a stopgap.
It seems to be an ambiguity that probably should get resolved.
Well, maybe what needs to happen is in her statute is a similar language in my statute, which is that I can see any record regardless of its level of confidentiality, but I cannot disclose. And I can't remember what the actual verbiage is, but so if an agency doesn't want to share with her exempt information because there's no provision for her to see that, Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at.
And I think
There's-
if we kind of copied and pasted that information from the state archivist statute, and I think it's in 387, or 357, that it basically gives me that authority to look at, but I cannot disclose. So it allows me to see things that are exempt.
I think that was honestly the governor's intention of the bill, at least that's my recollection of what was intended, and I think it just got drafted in a way that's a little bit.
Yeah, I think you should, I mean, I think you probably, you do need that authority.
I think it's a good long-term solution to add that to the legislative proposal. In the meantime, I mean, certainly if I was interacting with an agency and the agency was just refusing to give me the necessary documents, like.
Exactly.
And I want to make sure they're forewarned of that. Like, the purpose of the rules is to make sure that they're informed of, you know, if you do this, then this may happen.
I can just foresee a scenario where somebody requested a, category 4 document.
And they don't want to share.
They may have a reason to not share, but I just see that as being a conflict that could probably be avoided by a clarification of the statute.
That would be good. But also maybe a reason to think a little more about what I was suggesting about that introductory language. If you make it clear that these are things you're going to consider, but not necessarily, if you do this, it's an example of a violation in every case.
So I will change that language to a finding of bad faith may be considered in a variety of scenarios, including but not limited to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just real quickly, there is a statute, not just in the archivist statutes, but there's a statute in the public records law that basically provides for an in-camera inspection and confidentiality for a petition to Michael or a petition to me as DA. And so in certain cases, I would request the city, for example, to give me the records, and that's confidential. They have to give it to me.
Yeah. Again, it doesn't even apply to my members, but it seems like if there's an error, I can see this getting tangled up.
Yeah, so we probably ought to copy that same language, either out of your statutes or these statutes, and put it up in your statutes.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, good idea. 357, 875.
Yeah, I really.
192,422.
Like, that's what I understood to be the intention anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think it would have to be, because how else are they going to do that job? How else are you going to mediate or just do dispute resolution if you can't access them?
Well, but sometimes I could actually rule on a petition without actually seeing the record, because the petition describes it, the response describes it, I know where it is, and I don't need to see the record. But other times, I have to see the record. So it really varies from case to case.
Right, but you should be able to.
I should be able to get it.
Yeah.
So, I am sensitive to everyone's time and the fact that we are supposed to conclude in roughly 10 minutes. Did we conclude that we wanted to take a vote on this so I can go ahead and move forward with it, assuming that I will incorporate other sort of copy editing comments that people send to me individually?
Might as well, I guess I'll make a motion that we authorize Ginger to make the modifications we've talked about, plus any additional tweaks, and go ahead and publish.
Second that.
All in favor?
No.
Oh. Look at the hang of this eventually. All in favor? All opposed? All right. Now I think we have some time set aside for public comment. Public, do you have comments?
I'm not gonna get up. I know it's 15 minutes late. The Rec Management Committee, Mary Beth Herkert, and I basically came today to say thank you, Mary Beth, for all your work. Because, you know, you represent the public for us in a lot of ways. I also wanted to say I've worked on both sides of the aisle. I have a journalism degree. I worked as a journalist for a number of years in Oregon. I grew up in Eastern Oregon. I've lived in Western Oregon for a while now. I've now been on the dark side, so to speak, for about 10 years because newspapers began to die and there was nowhere for me to work. So I've seen both sides. I deal with the public on a daily basis. We are a small city growing, about 23,000. I previously worked in Cascade Locks and Canby. And so just keep the public in mind. I know that Salem is a very insular culture. Been down here enough over the years to know that. I'm 54, no shame in discussing that. I've lived in Oregon 50 of my years. So, you know, I applaud everything you've done. I've witnessed previous attempts to reform the public records law and make the process more open. So, I don't think some of you may realize how progressive this is, and as a citizen of Oregon, I'm thrilled that we've come this far. But don't forget us, the silent majority out there. I mean, even though I work for government, I'm a citizen too. So that's it. That's all I have to say.
Any other comments? Thank you all for being here. I will send out a meeting invite for a date in July, which doesn't include any sort of legislative action. And we can go from there. I really appreciate your time. Oh, when did you get? Okay. I got that part. I do really appreciate your time, and especially for those of you who traveled here. So, I get a motion to adjourn.
And so moved.
All right, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Oh, my God. Robert's rule.
I hate Robert's rule.
I remember we had a class.
Yeah. And it was very